discuss these latest developments now with our senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara, who joins us from Doha. Marwan, thank you for being with us. So we've heard from the Israeli Prime Minister tonight that the deal is going ahead, but with a caveat that Israel could resume the war when the first phase of the agreement ends. And he says that the Americans, Biden and Trump, would back him on this. What did you make of this first?
I believe him. I think he is exactly on that track and has been on that track since October 7, 2023. He's not interested in a ceasefire. He's interested in a hostage deal. That's why I think, briefly, there is a politics rationale, a policy rationale, and a strategy rationale for what he shared with us tonight. The politics, we've talked about it throughout the year, which is basically his personal future, his political future, his coalition future, really depends on the fact that there is a war, and there's a war atmosphere, and there's a defeat of Hamas, and there's a fulfillment of the goals of war. So these things are clear, and I think he needs his coalition for his own personal and political future, and the only way he can maintain the future and maintain his base is by basically continuing with the war and not accepting the diktats of Hamas, the Egyptians, the Qataris, or the Americans. And then there's the policy rationale, which is he really wants to defeat Hamas, the movement. He wants to defeat Hamas, the movement. He also wants to defeat Hamas, the idea. He thinks with force, enough violence, enough genocide, the Gazans will come to hate and curse Hamas as much as they hate and curse Israel. He thinks this is doable. He also thinks that once Hamas is defeated, he needs to be the one to dictate what comes after, not by dialogue, but by force. And last but not least, there's a strategic rationale. And the strategic rationale is that he's not going to end the war until he gets something in return. That could be either normalization of relations with Saudi Arabia and or annexations in the West Bank. And both of them could be delivered to him by President Donald Trump come January 20th. So he's not going to end in 6 weeks the war. He's going to basically have an agreement with Trump, and apparently there is some kind of an implicit agreement with Trump, that war will end when the West Bank is secured under Israeli control / annexation, and there is a normalization Abrahamic Accord type with Saudi Arabia.
That's interesting that you say that on that last point, because, I mean, some would argue that Netanyahu is an expert on saying different things to different audiences, and tonight he was clearly speaking to the Israelis. Do you think, though, because of what he wants, what you talked about there, the West Bank and so on, he perhaps could have given assurances to the Americans for sticking with the deal, for sticking with the ceasefire, because he wants certain things in return, as you say?
Look, I'm not sure who's lying, Netanyahu's lying or Biden is lying, but one of them is lying, not telling the truth, okay? Because Biden told us just a couple of days ago that Israel has committed, once the first 6 weeks are over, to continue with negotiations. And even if the time lapses, they will still continue with negotiations, not go back to war. That's what Biden told us. Now Netanyahu tells us, no. I got assurances from the Americans, apparently notably Trump as well, that he can basically break out of any negotiations and go back to war. I think that's what he wants. That's what he wants because that's what makes sense to him. And the past year and almost and a half proves that the Americans will, in the end of the day, follow in his footsteps, come what may. And now that Trump, has a whole number of lieutenants, including the ambassador to the United Nations, including the ambassador to Israel, including the national security advisor, including the Secretary of State, okay, and so many others are all total supporters of Israel and Netanyahu. So you have a Trump administration that imagine it's going to be even worse than the Biden administration for the Palestinians and Arabs. And hence, Netanyahu thinks that there's a lot to bank on that. And last but not least, I think Netanyahu, yes, he's a pathological liar in as far as I know from his record, but he's also a hyper-realist. He only believes in force, in power, in violence, not so much values and the likes.
Marwan, thank you. Always good to get your analysis. It's certainly a very complex situation, and it'll be interesting to see how all of this plays out. Thank you very much. Marwan Bishara is our senior political analyst.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.